Tooth was the situation of the toothache. Again, a man has an arm amputated, and experiences sensations in the hand which he has lost. The situation of the imaginary hand is in fact merely thin air. You look into a mirror and see a fire. The flames that you see are situated behind the mirror. Again, at night you watch the sky. If some of the stars had vanished from existence hours ago, you would not be any the wiser. Even the situations of the planets differ from those which science would assign to them. Anyhow, you were tempted to exclaim, "The cook is in the kitchen." If you mean her mind, I will not agree with you on the point, for I am only talking of nature. Let us think only of her bodily presence. What do you mean by this notion? We confine ourselves to typical manifestations of it. You can see her, touch her, and hear her. But the examples which I have given show you that the notions of situations of what you see, what you touch, and what you hear are not so sharply separated out as to defy further questioning. You cannot cling to the idea that we have two sets of experiences of nature, one of primary qualities which belong to the objects perceived, and one of secondary qualities which are the products of our mental excitements. All we know of nature is in the same boat, to sink or swim together. The constructions of science are merely expositions of the characters of things perceived. Accordingly, to affirm that the cook is a certain dance of molecules and electrons is merely to affirm that the things about her which are perceivable have certain characters. The situations of the perceived manifestations of her bodily presence have only a very general relation to the situations of the molecules, to be determined by discussion of the circumstances of perception. In discussing the relations of situation in particular and of ingression in general, the first requisite is to note that objects are of radically different types. For each type situation and ingression have their own special meanings which are different from their meanings for other types, though connections can be pointed out. It is necessary, therefore, in discussing them to determine what types of objects are under consideration. There are, I think, an indefinite number of types of objects. Happily, we need not think of them all. The idea of situation has its peculiar importance in reference to three types of objects, which I call sense objects, perceptual objects, and scientific objects. The suitability of these names for the three types is of minor importance, so long as I can succeed in explaining what I mean by them. These three types form an ascending hierarchy, of which each member presupposes the type below. The base of the hierarchy is formed by the sense objects. These objects do not presuppose any other type of objects. A sense object is a factor of nature posited by sense awareness which, 1. In that it is an object, does not share in the passage of nature, and 2. Is not a relation between other factors of nature. It will of course be a relatum in relations which also implicate other factors of nature. But it is always a relatum and never the relation itself. Examples of sense objects are a particular sort of color, say Cambridge blue, or a particular sort of sound, or a particular sort of smell, or a particular sort of feeling. I am not talking of a particular patch of blue as seen during a particular second of time at a definite date. Such a patch is an event where Cambridge blue is situated. Similarly, I am not talking of any particular concert room as filled with a note. I mean the note itself, and not the patch of volume filled by the sound for a tenth of a second. It is natural for us to think of the note in itself, but in the case of color we are apt to think of it merely as a property of the patch. No one thinks of the note as a property of the concert room. We see the blue and we hear the note. Both the blue and the note are immediately posited by the discrimination of sense awareness which relates the mind to nature. The blue is posited as in nature related to other factors in nature. In particular, it is posited as in the relation of being situated in the event which is its situation. The difficulties which cluster around the relation of situation arise from the obstinate refusal of philosophers to take seriously the ultimate fact of multiple relations. By a multiple relation, I mean a relation which in any concrete instance of its occurrence necessarily involves more than two relata. For example, when John likes Tom, there are only two relata, John and Thomas. But when John gives that book to Thomas, there are three relata, John, that book, and Thomas. Some schools of philosophy, under the influence of the Aristotelian logic and the Aristotelian philosophy, endeavor to get on without admitting any relations at all except that of substance and attribute. Namely, all apparent relations are to be resolvable into the concurrent existence of substances with contrasted attributes. It is fairly obvious that the Leibnizian monadology is the necessary outcome of any such philosophy. If you dislike pluralism, there will only be one monad. Other schools of philosophy admit relations, but obstinately refuse to contemplate relations with more than two relata. I do not think that this limitation is based on any set purpose or theory. It merely arises from the fact that more complicated relations are a bother to people without adequate mathematical training, when they are admitted into the reasoning. I must repeat that we have nothing to do in these lectures with the ultimate character of reality. It is quite possible that in the true philosophy of reality there are only individual substances with attributes, or that there are only relations with pairs of relata. I do not believe that such is the case, but I am not concerned to argue about it now. Our theme is nature. So long as we confine ourselves to the factors posited in the sense-awareness of nature, it seems to me that there certainly are instances of multiple relations between these factors, and that the relation of situation for sense objects is one example of such multiple relations. Consider a blue coat, a flannel coat of Cambridge blue belonging to some athlete. The coat itself is a perceptual object, and its situation is not what I'm talking about. We are talking of someone's definite sense awareness of Cambridge blue as situated in some event of nature. He may be looking at the coat directly. He then sees Cambridge blue as situated practically in the same event as the coat at that instant. It is true that the blue which he sees is due to light which left the coat some inconceivably small fraction of a second before. This difference would be important if you were looking at a star whose color was Cambridge blue. The star might have ceased to exist days ago, or even years ago. The situation of the blue will not then be very intimately connected with the situation, in another sense of situation, of any perceptual object. This disconnection of the situation of the blue and the situation of some associated perceptual object does not require a star for its exemplification. Any looking-glass will suffice. Look at the coat through a looking-glass. Then blue is seen as situated behind the mirror. The event which is its situation depends on the position of the observer. The sense-awareness of the blue as situated in a certain event which I call the situation is thus exhibited as a sense-awareness of a relation between the blue, the percipient event of the observer, the situation, and intervening events. All nature is in fact required, though only certain intervening events require their characters to be of certain definite sorts. The ingression of blue into the events of nature is thus exhibited as systematically correlated. The awareness of the observer depends on the position of the percipient event in this systematic correlation. I will use the term ingression into nature for this systematic correlation of the blue with nature. Thus the ingression of blue into any definite event is a part statement of the fact of the ingression of blue into nature. In respect to the ingression of blue into nature, events may be roughly put into four classes which overlap and are not very clearly separated. These classes are 1. The percipient events, 2. The situations, 3. The active conditioning events. 4. The passive conditioning events.